Hello, tech leaders. I'm Carol Palombini, psychologist and tech leadership coach, and this is my podcast, Tech Mind Insight. My mission is to be the change agent for tech leaders grappling with communication issues, imposter syndrome, burnout, and the complexity of tech leadership roles. In this show, I interview leaders and consultants working in the tech space to provide you with real-world insights into the challenges of leadership. If you want to be part of the show or have questions you'd like me to ask my guests, send me an email or DM me on LinkedIn. And today we have Denis Čahuk. Please correct me if I'm saying it wrong. But Denis is a life coach and technology expert who helps leaders and their teams in engineering organizations connect their human qualities with their technical expertise and craftsmanship ability. His current focus is improving the confidence and business understanding of engineering teams in small to medium businesses, while also building and nurturing self-development and craftsmanship communities with a book club, live streams, and newsletter. So welcome, Denis. Thank you for agreeing to be here with me today.
Hey, Carolina. It's Cahuk. You were pretty close, but I usually don't use the Karen on most of my platforms.
Can you say it again?
Cahuk.
Denis
Čahuk.
So
yes.
Denis Čahuk is here, and welcome, Denis. So Denis, first I want to introduce yourself the way you like it and share a little bit about your journey into the tech industry and how you transitioned into a consulting role.
I started off mentoring organically very early on in my career. So I just, I went to university in Ljubljana. I dropped out of university to immediately go into the industry and start working as an engineer. So I have a sort of very much heavy engineering background. But I always, my mother is a teacher, and I think that sort of rubbed off on me. My dad is an entrepreneur. So I was already set up on that road, whether I was aware of it or not. But throughout my career, in the first decade, I realized that the way that I approach problem solving in engineering organizations is very human-centered. It was very interesting to be sort of a technology specialist at the beginning, but you don't get very far by just making the computer happy, by just making the compiler happy. Most software issues are human problems.
Can I use this? I'm going to use this. I love this. You don't make a career with your love only to computers, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I naturally started mentoring people. I always shared what I had, what I learned. I always liked learning in order to share. I always liked accumulating and practicing new knowledge and new experiments in order to talk about them, to present them to others, to share my knowledge, to learn from them, to sort of optimize how we're really working as a team, to make it a little bit more enjoyable. And then,
explain a little bit of how you do today. Why do people contact you?
So it is not a, let's say, homogeneous sort of solution space. So there are varying reasons. So the top three, let's say, the top three are either an individual contacts me because they're stuck meaning that they have a recurring pattern, right? So they go work for a company, they have a fight usually with their manager or with senior management, and then they quit and they find another job, hoping that it will be better, but really it's them causing the loop. And then after like 2 or 3 iterations, job hops, they realize that, hey, this is actually following me around. It's actually, I have to deal with this. And I can't make progress until I actually deal with this. So they're sort of stuck. That's number one. Number two is leaders of teams approach me for similar reasons, but it's their team that is stuck due to some response to something that they might be communicating unconsciously, or maybe there's an overarching business cultural issue that really doesn't nurture the engineering department enough, and then they don't know. They would know how to operate in a very clean environment. They just don't know how to clean up a dysfunctional environment. That's number two. Number three is solopreneurs. This is a recent addition who want to follow in my footsteps and sort of see me working publicly on LinkedIn and in my communities. And they want to sort of follow from a, let's say, freelancer or employee stance towards solopreneur or consultant, or maybe to do a little stint in coaching or mentoring, or as a side hustle.
When you mentioned the second reason about the cultural aspect, do they have awareness of that when they talk to you the first time, or is it something that you identified while you're working with them?
I mean, a bit of both. I mean, it's not black and white. Generally, depending on the seniority of the leader that approaches me, the more senior they are, the more they sort of know how to articulate and underpin their culture issues with business outcomes. Or they might have seen my stream or seen a podcast of mine or read a newsletter post where I have spoken about that and then sort of connected the dots and reached out to me. So yeah, that's usually how it starts.
And in your experiences as a consultant, you had the opportunity to know many teams and be around many cultures and many dynamics, team dynamics. And how do you see emotions playing a role in the problems that you're hired to solve?
How do I see emotions as a role?
What is that? Like, you could put it a percentage. How is the weight of emotional problems, lack of communication, lack of emotional intelligence in the overall problem
So
the team has?
Emotional problems are pretty vague. So it really comes down to so if I just say it's all about emotions, it's gonna sound silly, right? So if it's gonna be 100%. And if I say it's 0%, nobody is that data driven. So it's not really a fair characterization. But I think if we compartmentalize it down, it'll serve at least this audience now to sort of visualize it a little bit better. In that, when we talk about the human problems, the sort of emotional or the sort of non sort of the what you would attribute to soft skills, the soft problems, let's say, the problems of
people
soft tissue,
problems.
of carbon, the carbon problems, not the silicon problems. We generally run into patterns of limiting beliefs or an imbalance or a dysregulated incentive structure, right? Where people are being punished for doing the right thing, or whether there's just a way too punishment heavy culture that doesn't incentivize or reward high quality activities, high quality behavior, or they don't even know what that is, and they don't have it really formalized or at least encouraged in their culture, in their DNA.
Yeah, what I also see in my practice regarding this is that a lack of awareness of how intentional you must be to communicate and to about your own emotions, and how your emotions and your mindset will ripple to the entire organization's mood and also to the politics, to the policies that you apply in the company. So as you're saying, sometimes you don't have the right incentives, the right kind of reward, because your mindset is still stuck on right or wrong, or not making mistakes. So you have a beautiful board saying that we have a lifelong learning organization and that we want to be innovative, but in the end, the leadership practices are not in alignment with these values, because their mindset is still stuck on the right and wrong, or this binary thing.
And it's not usually not even right or wrong. You're so right about this black and white sort of perception of how things should be, because this emotional impact stems from a too close attachment to decision making, right? So if I decide, I'll be attached to it because I made the decision, right? So it is this attachment to the input that went into the let's say the change or the process or the procedure or the incentives or even the project plan, not the output, right? So you want to be attached to the delight of the customers, to the success of the business, right? So, but those are not inputs. Usually, leaders put the cart before the horse, and then they say, okay, well, you need to put the business first, right? So we will put the inputs of the business first. So you need to work 8 hours a day, and you need to work like this, and you need to work like that, and you need to communicate like this, and we need to, put the business first by having recurring meetings and meet everybody. But that's not really serving the team. The team needs to put themselves, the team first, and the customer. That's the input.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you get a highly cohesive and prioritized business outcome. But the difference is in putting the input for the user first and the input, the needs of the team first, so that you can prioritize the outcomes of the business. But rather, teams often do the other way around. They put their own needs first, the needs of the business, and they underestimate they underestimate the needs of the customers. They underestimate the needs for their own well-being and for their own sort of relationships, interpersonal relationships between team members and stakeholders, hoping that it will produce good outcomes for the users. But usually, a bad environment cannot create a flourishing product.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And it's all like in this micro space when we talk about psychological safety. For instance, we notice that the research shows that it's not an organizational thing most of the time. It's a leadership team thing. So you can have in the same organizations teams that are running in a psychological safe environment and others that are not. And when I talk to some leaders, I see that they are not aware of how their behavior is influencing the well-being of the team and the safety to speak up. So you mentioned in our previous conversation, one thing that I thought was super interesting, the problem about managing up when the leader's stress become the center of the team dynamics, and it ends up in silos. Can you speak a bit about that?
Can you remind me which example we're talking about in our? We
were talking about a leader that when you got there with the team, they were so concerned that the boss would get stressed. They prefer not to say anything.
Yeah, so it's also a very good. It's a typical textbook psychological safety issue, right? But that the leader is generally not aware of. And I wholeheartedly recommend the book, The Fearless Organization, that really it highlights it is a book about psychology, not about tech specifically. But one of the main case studies in the book itself is Project Aristotle, which was run by Google. So it is by far one of the largest psychological safety and well-being studies done on a tech company. There are now many new ones, but that one I think is the one most cited in at least in psychology literature for tech. So a lack of psychological safety creates an illusion of performance, right? So because it becomes increasingly more difficult to talk about problems and to bring up issues, it creates this illusion that everything is okay. And psychological safety also has this sort of locality to it, where you don't have psychological safety with the business, but there's these little villages, and every village is defined by some gathering of people that have informally elected somebody who will essentially be the informal authority figure within that gathering. So it is that person being in the room or not being in the room that governs your state, essentially, and how much you empower them.
So I mean, you have one person around whom everyone gravitates.
So you can be part of many different groups, but depending on your context, you can be part of the engineering org, you can be part of the first level management org, you can be part of the UX org, all at the same time. But depending on your context, depending on your meeting, whenever you're in a closed group, there will always be like one person who's, let's say, out of balance state or sort of emotional dysregularity or disruption will cause the entire village, the entire gathering to adapt themselves to their sort of deficiencies, right? So that's usually where it happens.
And I think that that's actually worse on tech teams. I've worked with many kinds of teams, marketing teams and tech teams are my specialty, but I've had experiences with a lot of them. And because tech people, not just IT, but usually technical people, have this more introverted communication style and are usually conflict avoidant. So they usually don't like to stand out. Even worse if you have to stand out by disagreeing with someone else. So these more dominant personalities or stressed people, more neurotic people end up filling the room with their personality and like guiding but do you see that as one person specifically that what happens most? You have one person that disrupts the environment,
I
or
can
a
give
culture?
I can give you an example. I have an engagement a few years ago with a CTO of a company who was also the founder of the company. And we had a very good relationship one-on-one. They asked me for advice and sort of nurtured the relationship. It went first a little bit of technical problems, then it became socio-technical, and then it became coaching, right? So then we just kept going back and forth. And then at some point they said, Dennis, this is great. I want my team to have access to this. So we sent a retainer for them to sort of widen the scope. But they already had a very sort of controlling culture, which already underpinned the sort of lack of psychological safety. And when push came to shove and they were sort of having issues, disruptions with delivery on a tight deadline, the leader became stressed. Then everybody perceived this as, oh, this is the leader's executive coach. That's how they perceived me because they had no prior relationship with me. So they assumed that, okay, they won't waste my time, or they won't waste their time, because when they're under pressure, the leader's under stress. So they won't be, they themselves will limit themselves to activities that won't trigger micromanagement from the leader, right? So they already filter out all what they might perceive to be unnecessary activities, which might be social gatherings or doing the right things, or keeping quality high, or resting often. So they go into this sort of very much hustle mentality when close to a deadline. And then under such an environment, the leader, even though they're not speaking because they're under stress, they're not actually as actively engaged with the team as they could be. That's exactly when the team needs the most help. And it encourages behavior when they're on a tight deadline and they need the most help. That's the point where they will never ask for help. And
So
it put me as it's a vicious cycle, and put me as a consultant in this trap of, if you know Brooks' law says adding manpower to a project that's already late will just delay it further. But I'm not manpower there. I'm not there to help code. I'm there to help figure out, okay, things are bad. Is it as bad as we think, or is it worse? Is there potential of this getting worse? Right. So that's why you put a coach or consultant on such a team under heavy pressure, because then if there's a lack of psychological safety, then it's very possible that it will get even worse. Imagine this. You miss a deadline, you're a week late, and then nobody talks about the plan anymore. And then it slips into further delay, because now we're late. It might as well, might as well now do all the other things, or increase pressure even further. And then this never stops. This cycle that never stops. The moment it stops is usually when the stakeholders lose their appetite for such a project. Then it either gets canceled, or they grudgingly say, yeah, okay, it's done. We need to stop now. And then the team's burnt out, right? And then, of course, it's not the right time. So then they're never rested enough for it to be the right time for them to actually sit down and to address the cultural issues.
Yeah, but at the end, you spend a lot of energy of the team in managing the leader's emotions instead of actually putting the energy.
Exactly.
And all the priority becomes like easy managing the leader's the leader's energy, the leader's mood. So that's of course it's horrible for the team. And what are the most communication problems that you find? If you could list some of the things that you commonly see.
Oof. I mean, that's pretty easy. That's a lack of candor generally, or creating knowledge silos, or creating like two isolated decision-making procedures where somebody won't do an obvious decision because they might consult way too many people on something trivial, or they might constantly make a decision and then the team splits apart, basically a team of 6 doing 6 different things at the same time. So those are the most common. The general issue is that most teams aren't working as a team. That's the general communication problem, because of stress from stakeholders, or just because they have never really seen how a high-performing team operates. So they don't really have anything to compare it to. So they just think it's normal that everybody gets assigned work, then nobody communicates against that, and then communication happens in a reporting structure, not in a collaboration structure.
That must be even worse now in the remote setting. What I can see in companies that they are still trying to use the same arrangements they had when they were mostly in the office, when this was more natural, like the juniors were actually watching the seniors working in this high performance, and now some people had never worked in a full-time office space. And I don't see companies actually changing their practices to use improved methods of communication. Like, for instance, it's hardly for me to see teams using recorded videos to explain what they did, to ask questions. Everything is written down in the most succinct way possible, direct, with no emotions. But with this no emotion is like impossible. When you have a lack of intentionality regarding the emotion in your text, you sound like dry, too direct, too objective. And some people actually can perceive this as rudeness. How do you see this communication issue in remote teams? How do you think that can be improved?
So I mostly work with remote teams, so it's quite a common situation. One of the things I'm noticing, so the context is different depending on whether it's ICs, individual contributors, communicating with other ICs, or ICs communicating with their manager, or a group of managers communicating with each other, or with stakeholders, or with parallels from an outsourcing company or agency.
The leadership case.
Sorry?
Talk a little bit about the leadership case, the manager's communication.
So the manager's communication is generally that of trying to break up the project into milestones to match the calendar, rather than breaking it up in terms of communication flow, of information flow. Right? So if you say this is a large project, then if it's a small project, sure, no problem. You can break work up and you can parallelize it extremely aggressively. But for a large project, you need to be as a leader, you need to be thinking of, okay, so I need to set up communication flows so that this team can talk to these two stakeholders without going through me. For this to be successful in a month in, these two teams need to communicate with each other very, very tightly. We need to create an interface for how that happens without being too invasive, but also without really creating a silo. That is what you should be really focusing on as a leader. And generally what happens is that the leaders are already split up in silos, and then the leaders are talking to the leaders, so that the people who are actually paying for it and are caring about it, which is the customers and stakeholders, are not talking to the people who are actually building it, which is the engineers. So leaders create this issue of, if they're talking about the product and the work that goes into the engineering, it's not the right people having the right conversation at the right time. Yeah. So then you'll just create this sort of hand-off, divide and conquer control dynamic, which is pretty much anathema to any kind of agile style of working. Because you would ideally want to promote, okay, what we want to build doesn't make sense to have such a layout for the teams. How do we need to reorganize the teams for this project to be successful? How do we need to improve communication flows so this project is successful? What procedure is in the way? What recurring things and rituals and ceremonies are in the way of this project being successful? That's what you would have to be sort of addressing culturally in leadership. But usually there's this emotional underpinning of nobody really knows why it's there, or they might not be able to discuss it, or somebody's attached because they introduced it, and then they end up measuring way too much stuff, and usually on a way too individual level, to even understand that most of their procedures are holding them back.
Yeah, well, I get you. I feel that it's there's a lack of understanding of how intentional you have to be with the communication entire, not just your daily communication, but you have to have a communication plan as a leader. And I don't see tech leaders actually being prepared for that. I don't think that it's an individual problem. I think it happens more in the tech space, because the gap that you have to fill from being an individual contributor, a senior developer, into a leader, it's huge. So you've been praised your whole life for being the problem solver, from being the best coder, from being, and suddenly you have to pay attention to people and pay attention to process and communication and things that you were not being nurtured to. So when you talk about your mentorship, it's like role modeling. And I think that if leaders are worried about this, are intentional about this, and show their teams they're planning this communication, they will probably start cultivating those skills from the start.
So the general trend that's missing is a lack of scientific method in such companies. And to not be too academic about it, it's basically this underlying idea that either you're leading from hubris and you say, this is what I need, figure it out, or coming from a perspective of learning and skepticism. So this is the outcome that we want. This is how we think we can get there, but we're probably wrong about 90% of all the little decisions we just made. Like we need to learn which of those decisions are actually problem areas and how to improve on it and how to create a process that improves on it without it being managed from the outside, right? So it can be self-managed. Right? So it boils down to the element of tactics, right? So you want to encourage, and this is where the most problems happen, is that leaders, due to their own imposter syndrome or limiting beliefs, they don't encourage developers to just question the requirements, to question all the decisions that went up to the project up to this point and now being handed off to them. Right? Because that's where most of the value happens. Most of the value happens at the point where engineers say, well, why do we need this? Like, are we sure about this? Do we really need this? Who's waiting for it? Is one of the strongest questions that I encourage developers to ask. Like, who's waiting for this? Like, who's desperate to get this into their hands? If the answer is nobody, or if they don't know, they're very likely investing a lot of money into creating features that have no market demand. That's the biggest waste. And if somebody's attached to that, if some project owner or project manager or CTO or a sort of product-oriented CEO, usually founder-run private companies have that issue, that they might have a CTO or a CEO who's the founder, who has a very sort of strong opinion on the product. They will just want to have a feature set and they will want it implemented. Like, implement this feature set so that then I make an experiment in my head rather than delegating this system of thinking to their teams at a smaller scale. So then they end up building way too much in one go and not asking enough questions, or rather, because they build so much, the more you build, the bigger percentage of the things that are useless and a waste. So in a culture that lacks psychological safety as a baseline, this creates an environment where that the project is going to fail and people are just giving up on communicating it. So they're just sort of following the motions and they don't really want to repeat themselves of, yes, but like this usually goes wrong, or this won't work like that. Yes, but build it, I know. But you guys are always late, and so I'll pad it in my spreadsheet, and it just creates these sort of like little sort of offhanded remarks, offhanded jabs that then continue to create and cultivate this sort of negative atmosphere surrounding learning, surrounding well-being, surrounding productivity. And sorry?
And growing, like in your career growth, it actually stucks your career growth, because if you cannot ask, if you cannot make collaborative decisions, discuss about things, you're actually on autopilot and you're not actually gaining too much from that experience. You gain the first, and it must gain technical experience, but then you don't gain the emotion and the people skills, the emotional intelligence you need to move to a leadership position. Because that takes a lot of, as you said, of emotional skills to get to this leadership position. So if someone showed you right now, there is this person, he's an individual contributor, an engineer, who had a technical background like everyone that you met, and now he's been offered a first leadership position, first management position. What would you advise him? What would you say for this person to get on the right foot with being a leader?
I mean, for an IC, for a successful IC that went into leadership, my first suggestion is that they think at a larger scale. than themselves, right? So they will be tempted to say, well, I can either mentor 3 of my juniors or I can do it myself. And they are sort of comparing it down to this sort of 1x of how much can I accomplish and will we accomplish more if I do it versus my team. But really, the issue isn't so much about whether they can do it themselves. Once they become a leader, it's very likely that their amount of direct contribution goes down to 0. So they need to really ask themselves whether they want to do that, because they are leaving behind a large part of their career. So really, the first-time leaders should ask themselves, why do I want to become a leader? If you saw, for me, it was this idea that I saw good managers, I saw bad managers, and I said, okay, I want to be a great manager to the people I'm leading or the people I'm managing. That's what inspired me. I saw something that worked, I saw something that didn't, and then I tried adopting them and I got good feedback. And then I also started coaching other managers, other leaders on how to get there instead of what worked and how I really discovered it. Because for them, it might be different. So for somebody who's on this journey right now, I would definitely ask them, like, why do you want to be a manager? Like, you need to be really honest with yourself. Like, why do you want to be one? If it's just you having lackeys and you just, thinking of your own productivity and just delegating out as a solopreneur would, then that's not a good fit. That's definitely not a good fit. That person could probably be working much better at a sort of staff level, or still being technical and sort of cross-organizational rather than being on a single problem. But a manager is primarily a people function. Like you are there to nurture people, to mentor people, to manage their expectations, to manage their well-being, to cultivate an environment where they can succeed. And you got to believe in them more than they believe in themselves. That's the most important thing. There's nothing worse than a manager who just looks at a junior and they just think, yeah, but this person's a junior and they'll always be a junior because that's just how they are. Your manager has to believe in you more than you do yourself. Now, it is within you, of course, to be able to adopt that mindset, but sort of they need to be like half a step in front of you.
Yes,
if that's what you need.
You have to want this. You have to want to develop this uncomfortable part that you have to go through this uncomfortable feeling of I have to deal with people's emotions, and you have to want that, not try to avoid that and work inside of that. So I think that this is the perfect way for us to close our interview. Like, guys, look for guys, girls, everyone that wants to become a leader, especially in the tech space. You want to find your purpose. Why are you doing this? And it has to do with people. If you want to become just an authority, you can have other paths. You can become an architect, you can become a consultant. There are other ways to go. But if you want to become a leader, make sure you understand about people. And as Denis put it, there are ways and frameworks to do that. So Denis, what can people do, where they can find you if they want to talk to you or to ask for your services?
So for the deep team work, LinkedIn definitely. Start by building a relationship and having a little one-on-one chat with the leader. If you want private coaching, I'm best available on Mentor Cruise. It's a little platform that I sort of help you manage sort of the logistics of just having a one-on-one coach. Yeah, and I'm running a newsletter called Crafting Tech Teams and streaming. In that frame, I'm also streaming with Adrian Stanek on a little brand called Our Tech Journey. So that's sort of content creation part is my newsletter and the streams. So you can find me on Substack, Crafting Tech Teams at substack.com. Otherwise, my LinkedIn is my go-to place.
Yeah,
you'll find all
that's
the
where we met.
there. That's where we met as well. Yes.
That's where we met. If you want to reach out to me to deal with emotional intelligence and leadership, just reach out to me also on LinkedIn or click the button to schedule an appointment and we can have a chat. So thank you, Denis. Thank everyone. And I'll see you on the next episode of Tech Mind Insights. Bye-bye.